Hey everyone, and welcome to Almost Cancelled. I'm Peter, and I'm going to be talking about Marianne, the new Netflix French original series. It's a horror series. This is a review of episode 1. It is called Your Dreams. So I'll start spoiler free, of course, because it is in episode 1, and I'll give you warnings somewhere in the middle before I go into spoilers. So yeah, this is a French Netflix original, and it's about a horror author, this writer named Emma, who has been writing this sort of series of horror books ever since she was barely out of high school. And her final book in the series has just come out. It is about a character called Marianne, this supernatural witch or entity who is the wife of a demon who can possess anyone. And there's a rule where she can lie about anything, but she cannot lie about her name. If you ask her who she is, she has to honestly say Marianne, because reasons. But of course, it's a horror show, so you're expecting some of this to turn out to be real. And it turns out her stories came from a series of nightmares she used to have as a teenager, which is maybe a hint that, okay, it comes from something that's actually based in reality and not just from her head. And there's basically this character from her hometown who shows up to kind of like insinuate, I mean, that's putting it a bit mildly, that the entity is real and then it's infected her mother, and that leads her to going back to her hometown by the end of the first episode to kind of look into things. That's all I'll say plot-wise for spoiler-free, and I'll get into my thoughts. It's kind of mediocre. It's okay. It's not terrible. It's got a couple of little moments here or there that kind of made me go, oh, okay, that was kind of creepy, or that was okay. But it suffers from a few problems that I think kind of really hamper it, especially as a horror show. One is that I don't think there's much of a distinct style of the horror filmmaking, as it were. A lot of the scares feel very kind of not only bland, but in the way they're shot and the way they're presented, but also in the sense that it's going for kind of a, how do I phrase this? A poppy horror show or a pop horror movie. You know, it reminds me a lot of certain movies from the early to mid 2000s where, and this show is very guilty of this, it's got a lot of jarring tone shifts where it'll try to be kind of hip and cool when it's just being, we introduce the character of Emma and we see that she's kind of a badass and she's kind of cheeky and, no nonsense, bit of a, and badass wasn't the right word. That wasn't the right phrase to use. I mean more. They kind of present her as this, okay, this kind of against the grain. She'll crack raunchy jokes. She'll, if she's heckled in a crowd, she'll fire back with something. She has an attitude. She drinks too much. Like you got this kind of slightly punky kind of attitude. And she's kind of annoying actually at certain points. Not the worst ever, but there's definitely points, especially later on, where she's kind of not a horrible person or a horrible character, but just kind of annoying. Like, not irredeemable by any means, but just has this kind of adolescent. Like, I think it's supposed to be charming. I think it's supposed to be likable, and I don't think it is. I think it's the sort of thing. Maybe it's my age. Maybe now that I'm 30, a character like this just irritates me, as opposed to I find it endearing is the word I'm looking for. But yeah, back to the jarring tones. Is that there's one point in this episode right after the first kind of sort of hint for Emma that something creepy is actually going on. It's not a big hint, but there's the first time something kind of happens to her. The very next scene's her walking through the street with like a sort of indie punk song playing as she walks down the street in slow motion, and it's really trying to be cool, and it really felt like it jarred with me with anything it was trying to do the horror, and made it really difficult to kind of buy into it, and so that fell off. But what's weird is that I feel like it lacks style in the horror scenes for the most part. Like I said, there was one or two little touches that I actually did quite like. Otherwise, it's a very kind of typical, scary story style filmmaking where it's, a hand coming up from the bottom of the bed, or just other really kind of traditional things. I know I quite use the word generic. I used the word generic a lot yesterday when I was talking about the island, and I don't think this is quite in the same way that is. That still feels like someone cares about it. That still feels like someone's passionate about what they're doing. It's just not quite hitting, I think, a mark that makes it enjoyable. At least for me, as someone who's seen a lot of horror, then this doesn't really tick a lot of boxes for me. But and my cats are chasing each other behind me, so if I seem like I'm looking over and seeing if there's trouble happening, that's why. And I'm still a little bit sick, so I'm trying to deal with that as I go. But yeah, so Emma is, like I say, a little bit irritating. The horror is a little bit goofy in places. I think, when I was saying it was kind of a pop horror thing, is that it's almost getting into that almost Evil Dead kind of thing, but it's not actually being that silly. It's kind of tried to skirt this line between a serious horror film or horror TV show that's trying to be serious and taken seriously and spooky and whatever, but it's also doing these kind of over the top performances with people who may or may not be possessed. Some of the moments are quite derivative, I think that's fair to say, but it's the real skirting of the line of the tones for me that I think hurts it more than anything. It ends up not succeeding at either one very well. The goofier stuff, which for me is really hard to pull off. Goofier horror for me, when it comes to supernatural stuff, it ends up feeling Tim Burton-y, or ends up feeling kind of like it's kind of what I don't like about a lot of Guillermo del Toro stuff. Is I don't like the sort of goofier feel to his horror stuff. Some goofier horror works for me. I mentioned Evil Dead 2, of course, I enjoy. And I enjoy a nice bloody, silly, cheesy slasher movie or something like that. But when it comes to supernatural stuff, I tend to like it being a lot more serious. I tend to like it being taken very seriously, very mysterious. And there's a couple of moments in here that works. In spoilers, I'll mention them specifically, but for the most part, it doesn't quite do that. So we've got a character who's kind of annoying. We've got horror that for the most part is derivative and doesn't work very well. You've got jarring tones throughout, and the plot isn't bad. It's not a terrible idea for a premise. It's it's this idea that this character in her book, that she's kind of written like a hero to fight this villain in her book. But the villain's actually real, and she's going to actually have to deal with that as an adult. Which, might actually, like any good story, actually be representative of some of her inner demons. This idea that there's a lot of stuff in the episode that implies that she's got a lot of regrets about her childhood and her teenage years, that she's not really, her relationship with her parents isn't great, very strenuous because of actions she took. And I think there's this idea of, like, her making amends for those actions, but it's something she's been running from her whole life. So the idea that she's been running from this demon, this literal demon, by just writing about it to kind of like bottle it for 10, 15 years, and now she's having to finally face it and face all the things in her past that she didn't do, or did do, but you know what I mean, like all the things in her past that she regrets or has left a stain in her memory. So not a bad premise, by any means. I definitely, if I'm comparing this to The Island from yesterday, this is the better of the two shows. But I do think that it's not enough to make me want to watch any more of it. I don't think there's any risk of me checking out more. But I will give you the spoiler warning so I can talk about a little bit more of the plot and the moments, the horror moments. As I take a drink first, though, because I'm still a little bit sick, so I need to lubricate. I need to lubricate. Yes, lubricate the old vocal cords. I meant to say hydrate, but yes. So the couple of moments that work for me in the horror, because there's the show opens with, and this is not one of the moments that work for me. I'm just kind of starting from the start. The show opens with this character, this friend from junior high from the Emma's hometown, who goes in to see her mother, and her mother's like pulling out one of her teeth, and it's like really bloody and brutal, and well, it's not that brutal. I've seen worse, but it's pretty bloody. It's the sound effect more than anything is what's selling it, and it kind of sets up, and I actually got confused at one point because one of the things this show, I should have mentioned this is spoiler free, but one of the things this show seems to be trying to make up for its lack of like just raw filmmaking is stylish other things, and by that I mean like it's got this weird scene transition effect that it does because the character's a writer. There's like this like flick of pages that comes up between some scenes. Not every scene. I was worried it was going to be every scene because it happened for the first couple of scenes, and then it only happened a few times after that. But it was kind of over the top. It was kind of like, and the episode split into 2 chapters actually, because 2 of the times it did this, again, not every time, sometimes it was just some flicks of pages and then it would be a new scene, but other times it would be a couple of flicks of pages and it would land on a chapter page, like a chapter heading, and it would say chapter 1, and I think it was like Caroline or Katharina, which is the friend from her hometown. And okay, you want to split it into chapters? I mean, that can be fine. You know, there's 2 in this first episode, even though they don't really feel that separate by any means. But that's fine. I think I was worried it was going to overdo it. It's debatable if it still does. That combined with a lot of the piano music. In fact, when they're driving back to her hometown, like halfway through, it almost felt, it did almost feel a little Danny Elfman, the music, which is not a tone that I like. I'm not a fan of Tim Burton movies. I'm not a fan of Danny Elfman's work typically, especially the stuff that he did with Tim Burton. And it doesn't, don't get me wrong, it doesn't have that bounciness. It's not the do 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 do. It doesn't have that. But the way the choir kind of comes in and the way the piano was going, it almost felt Elfman-y to me. And that's a tone that's just not for me. I mean, it's debatable. I mean, if you think you would like that tone, if you think you're into that, then by all means, maybe you'll dig the music more than I did. But, you know, so, again, it was a clash of tones. It was a clash of tones for me. But anyway, so this prompts... so I got confused, actually, for a little bit at the start. Because after this opening scene... it cuts to a book signing. She's doing a reading from the end of her book, her final book. It gives us a little bit of a sense of her character because she kind of back talks to the crowd a little bit. Shows you that she's got a sense of humor and she can fight back and yada yada yada. But the way it transitions, it's like through pages of a book from the first scene to the second scene. And it made me think. Now, don't get me wrong. In context, given that we later find out that the character, this evil spirit or witch or whoever it is, this Marianne, is also in her book, it does make sense thematically of why they did this. But it did confuse me the first time because it kind of comes out of the book, and then it comes out of the book that she's reading a passage from on stage before she does her book signing, and. The reason why it confused me is because it made me think that the scene that we saw at the start, the opening scene, was in the book. It was, it was like, it was one of those things where, at the start of a movie or whatever, they'll do a little twist at the end of the first scene, and it'll turn out to be a scene in a movie the characters in the movie are watching, or a book they're reading, or something like that. I thought it was doing that because of the way it transitioned from the scene into the second scene. Of course, that turned out to be bullshit because then this friend from her hometown showed up at the book signing, and I was like, okay, so that did happen. It was just a confusing transition. And she gives this little bag to her at the book signing, and it has her mother's like teeth and hair in it, and it's really just this sort of little Texas Chainsaw sack. It's this little tiny thing, little tiny sack. But it's like Texas Chainsaw style stuff in the inside. And she's like, no, Marianne's real. Marianne's my mother. It's her. You did this. But writing your books, you better come back and fix this. And this stuff kind of like swaps between like this scene and then like Emma trying to like talk her assistant. It's her agent's assistant who she's kind of trying to be friends with. Try to talk her into like going out with her that night, and we know she's with a guy. It's referenced, and she sort of comes home drunk at the end of the night. Again, this is all just character stuff, like showing you what she's like, which it's not bad stuff. It's fine. It just kind of feels like it's going through the motions a little bit. But she comes back, and he leaves her the next day because she stood him up the night before. She was meant to meet him for dinner and didn't, and just came home drunk late. and he leaves. So we didn't really get anything with him. He may pop back up later in the show, of course, and maybe that's why it was worth introducing him that way. But you could have just have her go home and see that he's left already. I mean, it was an interesting thing. I suppose it did let them do the next scary scene, which was the kind of the first proper thing that maybe hints to Emma herself that something's afoot, because she has a nightmare and then she thinks she's woken up and then she has another nightmare, and there's one moment in this nightmare scene that kind of works for me. Although it's at this bordering on silly kind of level. It's like really bordering. It does some really cliched stuff with the woman coming in and like creeping around the bed and the hand coming up over. But there's a moment where she thinks she's woken up, and the boyfriend starts speaking weird, and he's facing the other direction. He's on his side facing the wall, and then he starts to she turns and faces away from him, and then he starts to turn, and we're looking at her, and then he's like just out of focus behind her turning around, but he's got this big grin in his face, and it's that weird. It's in that weird place where I think what it is. I think the grin itself is a little too truth or dare and too silly, but I like how it's shot. I like how it just happens like in the background, and she's lying there just hoping that everything's okay, but is kind of creeped out anyway. I think I like how it's executed in terms of the shooting of just that shot, but the smile itself's a little bit silly for me. And then she's kind of holding her head whilst the woman's kind of floating above her, and like it's a bit over the top for me. I'm not not my thing. But so the next day, so keep in mind the friend from the hometown, that's Caroline or Catherine. She was dragged away by security at the book signing because she started yelling at her and giving her this little sack with like Texas Chainsaw paraphernalia in it, and she goes to like her I don't know, her, I assume it's our publisher's office or whatever it is the next day, and her assistant's there waiting to speak to her, and she's like, hey, that woman that came to see you yesterday, that friend from your hometown, she's here, she's like waiting upstairs for you. And she's like, you let her in? And this is a fantastic question. Why did anyone let her in? Now, she didn't let her in herself, the assistant. It turns out that reception just let her in because she said, oh, I know so-and-so. It feels weird to me to just walk in and say, I know this famous author. Can you let me go and wait in their office? I feel like there would be more procedures for this. Or I say procedures, there'd be more of a, no, we'll wait until the author herself confirms that you're not a stalker. But... and this is where this moment's right out the Omen, because it's got this building's got kind of a a sort of modern design, and you can see all the balconies going up in the middle of all the floors, sort of looking down in the middle of the building, and she steps up on the ledge, and they're yelling up at her, no, don't do it, and she pulls a noose out. She says, take this back, and she drops this cross, this pendant, this cross. Says, take that back, and then she jumps and hangs herself. So it's very Omen, if you've ever seen The Omen, or its remake, if you're unfortunate enough to have done that. And it's one of those scenes where there was nothing super wrong with it. I do think it's a little bit weird how afterwards it feels like no one's as traumatized by this as I felt that they should be about what they've witnessed. It feels like it moves on a bit quick, but she does basically make a plan to go back to her hometown with the assistant to drop off this cross and see her parents, who we find out she's not spoken to in like 2 years or something like that. And they're going to the small town. There's a weird encounter with the local priest who is mad that she's back. This is one of these things where the way he just appears behind her on this like dock at the beach or next to a lighthouse. It's just really kind of like he Batmans into the scene. He just kind of appears behind her when, it feels just a little, again, just a little bit silly, I guess. There's a few things in this where I kind of went, ugh, and not in a, oh, it's been disgusting and creepy kind of way, in a, ugh, they went with that option. But they go to the mum. This mum who apparently has Marianne in her, and they don't think that for a second. She's a bit weird when she opens the door. So, and obviously, the daughter had said that Marianne's in her, so that's in her. That's in Emma's head. And Emma and the assistant go in, and this woman, like, was a big fan of her book. She's like, oh, and she's like, oh, I'll sign your book for you. But she's being kind of weird. She doesn't seem to care about the fact that her daughter's dead. It's really, little bit of that. The one thing I liked in this scene, though, there's one little moment in this scene that I quite appreciated, is that there's like a single frame of whatever Marianne really looks like, and you can't actually see what it is because it's too quick, because it's literally a single frame. There's just a flash at one point, and you can tell that there's something sort of darker for that one frame, but it's too quick. I mean, I could go through it frame by frame, and you'll see it if you really wanted to, but the effect here is just to get that quick little, oh, there's something. One of the most effective moments in the whole episode, because it just did it. Because one of the other problems with the music, actually, to go back to that, is that it overscores the scary stuff. It's constantly doing big strings. It's either creepy piano or big strings. It's too much. It's too much. Again, it reminds me of like early mid-2000s horror movies in that sense. But and then the woman wets herself, and they're like, "Hey, are you okay? Like, ma'am, like, can we help you?" kind of thing. And the assistant says, "Hey, I'll get a towel and help you clean that up." And the old woman grabs her hand and just, shoves it into her sort of mid region. Not like in a sexual way, just in a feel my piss basically kind of way, like on my dress or whatever she's wearing. And obviously this creeps them out, and they end up running out and going to her parents. And there's a weird scene here where she walks in and she catches her parents having sex, but it's played like something might be wrong. Like we hear some like moaning, and I actually said, as soon as I heard it, I thought to myself, that sounds like sex. And she's going up the stairs slowly, and sure enough, her parents, who are like, in their 60s, are having sex at the top of the stairs, and they're butt-ass naked. This show's French. It's quite happy to show you naked, regardless of age. And she runs out. It's kind of weird, and she's going to go away, but the mom's like, no, come in. Does your friend here like something, stuffed tomatoes or something like that? She said. And so they come in for dinner, and they're going to stay there now. They're going to spend the night, and they have a bit of a fight over dinner. Her dad kind of like gives her some shit for not like, because she says, "Oh, shouldn't the priest guy, shouldn't he have like forgiven me for whatever I did by now?" And he's like, "Well, you kind of have to be wanting to ask for forgiveness. Maybe ask your mother for forgiveness." And we don't really get to hear too much about what happened beyond she left and they didn't want her to. She maybe abandoned them as soon as she turned 18 or something like that. I'm sure there's more history that the show will explore as it goes on. And it is what it is. But it all builds up to one kind of big crescendo scene at the end, where the assistant wakes up because the lighthouse light is sort of coming in from it's a seaside town, and it comes in and kind of wakes her up, and she goes up to go to the bathroom. And as she's walking around, she, hears some creepy noises. It's a bit unsettling. I mean, to her, not to us, the viewer. It's kind of, it's just, I don't know. It's a little bit too, like, I don't know, a little bit too kids haunted house level of spookiness, I guess, is what I'm saying. But she goes to the bathroom, and like it's like someone tries to like break in the door. Well, not break in, but just violently rattle the door. And she's like, "I'm in here. Someone's in here. Sorry." But when she leaves, the one really interesting thing it does here in terms of a creepy moment, although it still overscores it, there's still too many strings going. It should have just went silent. But the mum, Emma's mum, just walks like, it was once she's kind of like halfway up the stairs. Emma's mum just walks past the stairs completely naked, very quiet. Not too dissimilar to a moment in It Chapter 2, actually. If you've seen the trailer for It Chapter 2, the first one that has a lot of that scene with the old lady, very kind of similar moment. And then she kind of walks back out, and then it does like a kind of bait and switch where she's staring at the naked old lady, and it kind of loses a bit of its luster because she starts throwing up, the old lady, which vomiting's never something I care about in horror movies. Like unless it's like Lucio Fulci, like literally puking up your intestines. Like vomiting's just kind of like whatever. But as that's happening, then the dad like jumps out from the side, just off camera, also completely naked. He's got a lot of scarring in his back as if he's been like carving letters in there. And we know Marianne can like possess people. Could she possess more than one at a time? That's an interesting question. It seems like she can, unless her parents are just evil anyway. Which who knows? Maybe that's where the show's going. But he just kind of like holds her and yells at her for a little bit, and then after the two parents hold hands and just walk out the house naked. And this is where Emma kind of comes in, is woken up and says, "What's happening?" She's like, "Oh, your parents." And she's like, what about them? They've went out, and she runs outside. She sees them walking the distance. She sort of chases them into like woods that are like right next to the house. And I will say this is the only moment in the show where I thought the lighting was kind of good, because I thought like all the scenes earlier on where she's having the dream in bed, like it was just kind of this big strong green light, and it just didn't really feel, I don't know, it felt very amateur, the lighting, and I feel bad saying that, but it looked like something that we might have tried to do when I was doing like student films and stuff like that, where we wanted that cool kind of like a bit of green light coming in, and we're trying to do our artsy fartsy horror short, and because we're not skilled cinematographers, it just looks like a big green light pointing at the room, which is not how it's supposed to feel. And it's hard to explain the difference between how it's supposed to look and how it looks in this, or how it looks when you don't know what you're doing properly. But there is a, trust me, there's a difference. It looks very stark and just kind of in your face and unnatural. And obviously the green light's always going to feel a little unnatural because it's green, but it just, whereas here there's like a nice bit of mist going on and there's light, and it's basically the naked parents are waving at her and kind of like going into whatever creepy place in the woods they're going to, and then it kind of ends with the naked dad sort of running out of whatever and grabbing her and yelling at her, and she falls down, and that's basically the end of the episode. So the ending's not too bad. The ending's probably the most promising part of the episode, admittedly. I do think the music's used far too much, and it's not to my taste, so that's a big problem I have, even when it's doing something okay in terms of the horror stuff. Like I say, there's 2 or 3 little techniques that are used that I quite like. A lot of it though feels very mid-2000s. A lot of it has very jarring tone, because you look at the tone of this last 10 minutes and then compare it to like the first like few scenes. And I know obviously horror movies usually start, or horror shows, same difference, usually start with some lighter scenes, getting to know the characters before the horror stuff starts. I get that, but it doesn't feel like it belongs together in this. It feels like it's jumping back and forth. And it's funny because I know like the awkward naked people thing can be kind of funny and also scary at the same time. There was a movie this year, I won't spoil it, but there was a movie this year that did it very well. Whereas this, it feels like it's doing a good job of the creepiness at points with the naked old people. And just the way they're walking around. Again, it should be silent. It's kind of a bummer that it's not. But then the vomit starts, and it kind of like takes you out of it, and it just feels like we're doing something goofy now. So, and I sure, her walking in and them having sex earlier is kind of like foreshadowing, I guess. I guess that's the point. Her being uncomfortable with them being naked. I guess that's the idea, that she's uncomfortable with opening these demons from her past, opening up these experiences and memories, and she's going to be forced into it. And it's just kind of like seeing her parents naked and having sex. She doesn't want to see that. That this is like exposing everything she doesn't want about her past. But I mean, what is the start of someone's past if not their conception? I suppose, I don't know. So there's some thin thematic things going on in there that I can kind of grasp at. But overall, I'd say it's a pretty mediocre experience. It's definitely a little bit left of my taste in terms of horror, and I like a lot of horror stuff. But when it comes to stories like this, it needs to kind of hit some specific notes for me. It needs to take itself seriously. It needs to basically rely on its filmmaking. More often than not with horror, I often say the story's not that big a deal in horror. What's important is how it's presented. And the presentation for this ranges from dull to silly to the odd little moment of like, oh, that was quite good. But mostly dull and silly. With this ridiculous page book transition moment as well. So, rough overall. But that's the first episode of Marianne. So, maybe check it out. I wouldn't completely say that you should avoid it at all costs. If you're looking for a little horror series of about 8 episodes, I believe it is, then you might get into it. You might, if it sounds more like your sort of thing, do try it. But I think it's not going to be winning any awards, and I do think that unless it is appealing directly to your taste, it's probably not going to win you over. So that is Marianne episode 1. By all means, you can, of course, let me know what you thought of the first episode in the comments below. You can as well, of course, let me know if the rest of it was any good, if you watch more of it. The chances of me going back and watching more are very slim, But even if I don't, I always like to at least know that some other people enjoyed the rest of it, or if they hated the rest of it, then it makes me feel good that I didn't waste my time. But you can do that. You can, of course, like and subscribe, and you can rate the audio version of the podcast on Apple Podcasts. Gives a nice 5-star review, helps more people find the channel and the feed, and so that's very good. You can also support us, of course, financially over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, where you can support us for as little as $1 per month, and that keeps all the content coming, keeps the production value improving. Notice they almost cancelled at the bottom. It's got like little scan lines going through it now and stuff. Yeah, look at that. Production value, damn it. I kid. But you could do that and get some bonuses and exclusives, and there's higher tiers as well. We get your name at the end of the videos and things like that. But that is me, so thank you once again for watching or listening. Do look out for Unbelievable, the other Netflix show that launched today. Me and Connor, I think me and Connor are reviewing it, assuming he's remembered. If he's not, I'll do it on my own too. But Unbelievable is a limited series starring Toni Collette. Very serious subject matter, and we will be having a look at that. Should be up not too long after this goes up, a few hours probably. So thank you very much once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV, guys. Have you got any vanilla?